The two suns of Kepler 442b burned hot in the orange sky. Taiho stood in the crowded market square, sweat running down his face. He wiped it away with his sleeve and looked around at the chaos. Aliens of every shape and size filled the square. Some had 4 arms. Some had scales. Some floated above the ground on strange machines. And all of them were here for the same reason: the resettlement exchange. Taiho hated this place. He hated the smell of it. He hated the sounds of it. Most of all, he hated what happened here. Living beings were bought and sold like farming equipment. But he had no choice. His farm was dying, and he needed help. 3 years ago, Taiho had been an important man on Earth. He had studied plants and farming at a big university. He had dreams of feeding millions of people. But then a great migration happened, and millions of humans were sent to distant planets to start new lives. Taiho ended up here, on this dusty rock, trying to grow food in 12 hydroponic domes. It was not going well. The growing season was almost over, and half his crops had failed. He worked 18 hours a day, but one man could not do everything. He needed another pair of hands. He needed a worker. That was why he was here, standing in the hot sun, waiting for the auction to begin. The auctioneer was a Krillian, a species with 4 arms and blue skin. He stood on a raised platform and spoke into a device that made his voice very loud. Behind him, a line of beings waited to be sold. Most of them kept their eyes on the ground. Taiho watched as the auction began. Strong workers went for thousands of credits. Skilled technicians went for even more. The buyers were mostly wealthy aliens who owned big mining operations or pleasure houses. They looked at the beings on stage like they were looking at livestock. Taiho's stomach turned. He only had 200 credits to his name. He could not afford anyone useful. Then he saw her. She stood at the very end of the line, separated from the others. She was Valori, a species known throughout the galaxy for their beauty. The Valori had silver skin that seemed to glow in the sunlight. They had large eyes the color of purple flowers. They moved like dancers, graceful and smooth. But this Valori was different. A thick scar ran down her left leg, from her hip to her knee. She stood with most of her weight on her right side, her body tilted at an angle. When she moved, she limped badly. Her silver skin was dull, like metal that had not been polished in years. And her purple eyes were empty. There was no light in them. No hope. Nothing at all. Taiho could not look away from her. The auctioneer noticed that the crowd was getting smaller. Most of the good workers had already been sold. He pointed at the Valori woman with one of his 4 arms. "Next item," he announced in his loud, bored voice. "Valori female. Name, Yuna. Previous occupation, pleasure house servant. Damaged during a pirate raid 2 years ago. Limited mobility. Cannot perform standing work for long periods. Cannot run. Cannot lift heavy objects." He paused and looked at the crowd. Almost everyone had turned away. Nobody wanted damaged goods. Starting bid, 50 credits. 50 credits. Taiho blinked. That was nothing. That was less than he spent on seeds in a week. He looked at Yuna again. She had not reacted to the auctioneer's words. She simply stood there, staring at nothing, waiting to learn her fate. How many times had she stood on platforms like this? How many owners had she had? How many times had she been thrown away when she was no longer useful? Taiho thought about his farm. He had automated seating systems that could be operated while sitting down. He had computer interfaces that only required fingers and eyes. He did not need someone who could run or lift heavy things. He needed someone who could press buttons and read data. 50 credits, Taiho said loudly. A few aliens turned to look at him. A human buying a Valori? That was strange. Humans were newcomers to the galaxy, considered primitive and uncivilized. Most species did not think much of them. The auctioneer looked surprised. 50 credits from the human. Do I hear 60? Silence. 50 credits going once. Going twice. The auctioneer brought down his hammer. Sold to the human farmer. Yuna's purple eyes moved for the first time. She looked directly at Taiho, and he felt the weight of her gaze. There was no gratitude in her expression. No relief. Just a cold, careful assessment. She was studying him, trying to figure out what kind of monster he was. Taiho paid the 50 credits and signed the ownership papers with shaking hands. A guard removed Yuna's chains and pushed her toward her new owner. She stumbled on her bad leg and almost fell, but she caught herself. She did not ask for help. Come on, Taiho said quietly. My transport is this way. Yuna followed him without a word. She limped through the crowded market, keeping her eyes forward, ignoring the stares of the aliens around them. Some of them laughed at the sight. A primitive human with a broken Valori. What a strange pair. The transport was a small old vehicle that Taiho had bought second-hand. It was dented and dirty, but it worked. He opened the passenger door and gestured for Yuna to sit. She hesitated. In her experience, slaves did not sit in the front. They sat in the back with the cargo. Go ahead, Taiho said. The back is full of farming supplies. There's no room. Yuna climbed in slowly, stretching her injured leg out in front of her. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed on the dashboard. She did not look at Taiho. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The transport lifted off the ground and began moving toward the edge of the city. They flew in silence for a long time. The city disappeared behind them, replaced by endless red desert. The twin suns moved across the sky, casting double shadows on the rocks below. Taiho did not know what to say. He had never owned another being before. The whole idea made him sick. But he needed help, and she needed somewhere to go. Maybe they could help each other. Finally, he spoke. I should tell you something, he said, keeping his eyes on the navigation screen. I bought you to work on my farm. That's all. You will have your own room. You will eat at my table, because I'm not going to make you eat alone like an animal. But this is a business arrangement. Nothing else. Do you understand? He waited for her to respond. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her voice came, soft and musical, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. It was the most beautiful sound Taiho had ever heard, and it was filled with sadness. You speak as if I expect kindness, Yuna said. I do not. I have not expected kindness for a very long time. Taiho's chest felt tight. He gripped the steering controls and kept flying, not trusting himself to speak. Behind them. The auction market grew smaller and smaller until it vanished completely. Ahead of them, somewhere in the red desert, Taiho's farm waited. And Yuna, for the 100th time in her life, prepared herself for the worst. The farm appeared slowly through the dust and heat. 12 glass domes sat in 2 rows, their round shapes shining under the twin suns. Between the domes stood a small building made of gray metal. It was simple and plain, not pretty at all. Taiho landed the transport near the main building. He turned off the engine and sat quietly for a moment. He did not know what to say to the woman beside him. He had never owned another person before. The whole idea made him feel sick. This is my farm, he finally said. It is not much, but it is home. Yuna looked through the window. She had seen many places in her life. Grand palaces with golden walls. Dark ships filled with screaming prisoners. Pleasure houses decorated with silk and jewels. All of them had been prisons. She expected this place would be the same. Taiho got out of the transport and walked around to her side. He opened the door and offered his hand to help her down. Yuna flinched. Her body went stiff, preparing for pain. But no pain came. He was only trying to help her out of the vehicle. She did not take his hand. She climbed out by herself, moving carefully on her damaged leg. The pain was always there, a constant fire burning through her muscles. She had learned to live with it. She had learned to live with many terrible things. Taiho led her to the main building. The door slid open with a soft sound. Inside, there was a simple room with a cooking area, a table, and 2 chairs. Everything was clean, but old, worn down by years of use. "This is the kitchen," Taiho said, pointing. "You can use anything here. I am not a good cook, but there is plenty of food." He walked to a door on the left side. "This is my room. You do not need to go in there." Then he walked to a door on the right side and opened it. "This is your room." Yuna stepped forward and looked inside. The room was small, with a single bed against one wall. There was a window that looked out at the red desert. There was a simple desk with a chair. There was a small space for closed dot, and on the inside of the door, there was a lock. Yuna stared at it. Her 2 hearts, the twin hearts that all Valerie possessed, began to beat faster. "The lock works," Taiho said quietly. "I put it there this morning, before I went to the market. You can lock the door whenever you want. I will never come in without asking first." Yuna could not speak. She had lived in many places. She had served many owners. Not one of them had ever given her a lock. Not one of them had ever cared if she felt safe. She turned to look at Taiho. She studied him carefully for the first time. He was not tall or handsome. His skin was brown from years of working under alien suns. His hands were rough and covered with small scars. His eyes were dark and tired, with deep lines around them. But there was something in those eyes. Something she had not seen in a very long time. Something that might have been kindness. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why what? Why would you give me a lock?" Taiho was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was rough with emotion. "Because everyone should feel safe when they sleep. That is not special. That is just basic respect." Yuna did not understand this human. She had been taught that humans were dangerous creatures. They came from a world that was constantly trying to kill them. They were violent and aggressive. The galaxy feared what they might become. But this human had spent 50 credits on a damaged slave and given her a lock for her door. The next few days passed slowly. Taiho showed Yuna her job. She would sit at a computer and enter information about seeds. She would track which plants were growing and which were dying. She would watch for problems and tell Taiho when something was wrong. It was simple work. Boring work. But it was work she could do while sitting down, and Taiho never complained about her speed. He never made cruel jokes about her limp. He never looked at her the way other males had looked at her. They developed a routine. In the mornings, Taiho would work in the domes, checking the plants and fixing the machines. Yuna would sit at the computer, entering data and running reports. In the evenings, they would eat dinner together at the small table. Taiho's cooking was terrible, but the food filled her belly. He always made sure she had enough before he served himself. He always asked if she needed anything else. On the 7th night, Yuna found the courage to ask a question. "How did you come to this planet?" Taiho looked up from his plate. He seemed surprised that she had spoken first. "I was an agricultural engineer on Earth," he said. "I designed systems for growing food in difficult places. When the Great Migration started, they needed farmers on the frontier worlds. I volunteered. You chose to come here?" Yuna could not hide her surprise. "You wanted to live in this place?" Taiho smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I thought I can help people. I thought I could grow food for colonies that had nothing. I did not know how hard it would be. He looked around the small room. I did not know how lonely it would be. Yuna understood loneliness. She had been alone her entire life, even when surrounded by crowds. In the pleasure houses, she had been an object, not a person. She had smiled and danced and done whatever was demanded. But no one had ever known the real Yuna. No one had ever tried to know her. "My people have a saying," she said softly. "Loneliness is a slow death. It is better to die quickly than to live for years with no one who sees your true self." Taiho met her eyes. "What do you believe?" Yuna thought about the question. What did she believe? She had stopped believing in anything long ago. She had simply existed, day after day, waiting for her life to end. "I believe that I am very tired," she said. Taiho nodded slowly. He did not offer empty words of comfort. He did not tell her that things would get better. He simply accepted what she said and returned to his meal. Somehow, that honesty meant more than any kind words could have. That night, Yuna locked her door and lay in the darkness. She listened to the wind blowing across the desert outside. She thought about the humans sleeping in the next room. She thought about the lock on her door and the food in her stomach, and the work waiting for her in the morning. She did not trust Taiho. She could not trust anyone. Trust had been beaten out of her years ago, but she was beginning to wonder if maybe, possibly, this human was different from all the others. Maybe he really was just a lonely farmer who needed help. Maybe she was just a broken woman who needed a place to rest. Maybe. On this strange planet far from both their homes, they could find a way to survive together. Yuna closed her purple eyes. The lock on her door was solid and strong. For the first time in many years, she fell asleep without fear. Outside, the twin suns set behind the red mountains. Inside, something new was beginning to grow. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives were about to change forever. 8 weeks passed on the farm, and slowly, everything began to change. It started on a quiet evening when Yuna was looking at data on her computer screen. Taiho was eating his dinner at the table behind her. Neither of them was talking. The silence between them had become comfortable, like a soft blanket. Then Yuna noticed something strange. "The nitrogen levels in Dome 7 are wrong," she said suddenly. Taiho stopped eating. His fork hung in the air, halfway to his mouth. "What did you say?" Yuna's silver cheeks turned slightly darker. She had not meant to speak. It was not her place to comment on the farm. She was only a data worker. She was only a slave, but Taiho was already standing up. He walked over to her computer and looked at the screen. "Show me," he said. Yuna hesitated for a moment, then moved her fingers across the controls. Charts and graphs appeared on the screen, showing weeks of data. "Look at this line," she said, pointing. "The nitrogen levels go up and down in a pattern. Every 3 days, they rise. Then they fall again. The same pattern repeats over and over." Taiho stared at the screen. He had been looking at these numbers for months, but he had never seen the pattern. "Your filtration membrane is damaged," Yuna continued. "There is probably a small hole in it. The hole gets bigger when the temperature rises during the day. That lets too much nitrogen through. When the temperature drops at night, the hole gets smaller again." Taiho turned to look at her. His eyes were wide with amazement. "How do you know this?" Yuna lowered her gaze. "The pleasure houses trained us in many things. We were meant to be beautiful decorations, but decorations that could also be useful. I learned about plants and growing systems because some clients like to talk about such things." She spoke the words without emotion, as if she was describing the weather. But Taiho felt anger rising in his chest. They had trained her like an animal doing tricks. They had used her mind the same way they had used her body. "That is horrible," he said quietly. No one should be treated that way. Yuna looked confused. Why do you say that? It was normal. It was my life. That does not make it right. No one had ever said such things to her before. Yuna did not know how to respond, so she simply turned back to the computer screen. The next morning, Taiho went to Dome 7. He found the filtration membrane and examined it carefully. There was a tiny hole, exactly where Yuna had predicted. He fixed it in less than an hour, and within 3 days, the nitrogen levels were stable again. After that, everything changed between them. Ho started asking Yuna for her advice on the farm. At first, she gave only small suggestions, afraid to say too much. But Taiho listened to every word. He thanked her for every idea. He treated her opinions like they mattered. So she became bolder. She noticed that Dome 3 was receiving too much sunlight. Taiho adjusted the reflective panels, and the plants grew healthier. She suggested mixing 2 types of fertilizer that no one had ever combined before. Taiho tried it, and the results were incredible. She used her empathic abilities, the special gifts that all Valori possessed, to sense when plants were suffering. She could feel their stress before any machine detected it. The farm began to transform. Crops that had been dying started to grow strong. Domes that had been half empty filled with green leaves. For the first time since coming to this planet, Taiho felt real hope. But the farm was not the only thing that was changing. Yuna was changing too. The dullness slowly faded from her silver skin, replaced by a soft, healthy glow. The emptiness in her purple eyes began to fill with light. She started humming while she worked. Old songs from her childhood that she had forgotten she knew. One evening, Taiho told her a funny story about his time at university. He had accidentally made tomatoes grow as big as his head by mixing up 2 different chemicals. My teacher was so angry, Taiho said, laughing at the memory. He made me eat tomato soup every day for 3 weeks. Yuna laughed. It was a small laugh, quiet and surprised, like she had forgotten she could make such a sound. But it was real. It was the most beautiful thing Taiho had ever heard. He realized in that moment that he was in trouble. He thought about Yuna constantly now. He noticed how her silver hair caught the light of the sun's. He noticed how her fingers moved gracefully across the computer controls. He noticed the small smile that appeared on her face when she solved a difficult problem. He found himself making excuses to work near her. He stayed awake late at night, hoping she would come out of her room so they could talk. He cared about her happiness more than he cared about his own, but he said nothing. He did nothing. He had promised her safety. He had promised that their arrangement was only business. Breaking that promise would make him no better than all the masters who had come before. What Taiho did not know was that Yuna was also changing in ways. She did not expect that she had met many species in her life. She had served Krillians and Valori and many others. She had learned that all beings were the same inside. They wanted power. They wanted pleasure. They wanted to use others for their own benefit. But Taiho was not like the others. He worked harder than anyone she had ever seen. He woke before the suns rose and worked until they set. He ate simple food and wore simple clothes. He never complained about his difficult life. And he treated her not as property, but as a partner. Sometimes, late at night, Yuna would lie in her bed and think about her life. She thought about all the pain she had suffered. She thought about the years of emptiness and despair. And then she thought about Taiho, and something warm would bloom in her chest. She did not have a name for this feeling. It had been so long since she felt anything good that she had forgotten what happiness was called. But she knew she did not want to leave this place. She knew she wanted to stay here, on this dusty farm, with this strange and gentle human. She said nothing. She did nothing. She was afraid. Afraid that speaking would destroy everything. Afraid that his kindness was just a dream that would disappear if she reached for it. So they continued as they were. Two lonely souls circling each other like planets around a star. Growing closer every day, but never touching. The farm grew stronger, the plants grew taller, and somewhere in the red desert, hidden in two frightened hearts, love was growing too. It was waiting for the right moment to bloom. Neither of them knew that. The moment was coming soon. Neither of them knew that. Fate was about to push them together in a way they never expected. For now, they simply lived and worked and waited, together yet apart, under the light of the twin suns. The storm season came without warning. One morning, the sky was clear and orange. By afternoon, massive clouds of red dust had swallowed both suns. The wind screamed across the desert like an angry beast. Sand and dirt flew through the air so thick that Taiho could not see his hand in front of his face. This was normal on Kepler 442b. Every year, the storms came. They lasted for weeks, sometimes months. Communication signals died. Travel became impossible. Every farm and settlement was cut off from the rest of the world. Taiho had prepared for this. He had reinforced the domes. He had stored enough food and water to last many weeks. He had checked every system twice. The storms were dangerous, but he had survived them before. What he had not prepared for was the ship. Taiho was in the far domes when it happened. He was checking on a batch of grain plants that had been struggling. The wind howled outside, shaking the glass walls. He could barely hear himself think. Then he saw it through the dust. A dark shape coming down from the sky. A ship landing near the main building. His blood turned to ice in his veins. No one visited during storm season. The weather was too dangerous for casual travel. The only ships that flew in these conditions were military ships and pirate ships. Taiho did not wait to see which one it was. He simply ran. He burst out of the dome and into the screaming wind. Sand hit his face like tiny knives. The thin air burned his lungs with every breath. Running on this planet was painful on normal days. In a storm like this, it was agony. But he did not slow down. He could not slow down. All he could think about was Yuna. Yuna alone in the main building. Yuna who could not run on her damaged leg. Yuna who had already suffered so much in her life. Please, he begged silently. Please let me get there in time. The ship on the ground was a Krillax raider. Taiho recognized the shape from news reports. Krillax slavers were some of the worst criminals in the galaxy. They captured valuable beings and sold them to the highest bidder. Someone had told them about the Valori living on a human's farm. Taiho reached the main building and threw open the door. What he saw inside made his heart stop. Two Krillax soldiers stood in the main room. They had blue skin and 4 arms and dark armor. Energy weapons hung from their belts. Behind them, 2 more soldiers blocked the door. And in the corner, pressed against the wall, was Yuna. She was standing. Despite the terrible pain it must have caused, she was standing on her bad leg. In her hands, she held a farming laser, a small tool meant for cutting plants. It would do almost nothing against their armor, but she was holding it anyway. Her purple eyes were blazing with defiance. She had been a slave her whole life. She had been broken and used and thrown away. But she was not going to surrender without a fight. The leader of the soldiers turned to look at Taiho. He was bigger than the others, with a thick scar across his blue face. "The human farmer," he said, his voice deep and cruel. "We were wondering when you would arrive. We are taking the Valori. She has value, even damaged. Walk away now, and we will let you live." Taiho did not answer with words. Instead, he grabbed the plasma cutter from the wall. It was a heavy tool, meant for cutting through metal when repairing equipment. It was not a weapon. It had never been designed as a weapon, but humans had evolved on a planet that was constantly trying to kill them. They had hunted animals 10 times their size with nothing but rocks and sticks. They had survived ice ages and famines and countless wars. When protecting the people they loved, humans were absolutely terrifying. "She is not going anywhere," Taiho said quietly. The Krillax leader laughed. It was an ugly sound. 1 human against 4 soldiers? With a cutting tool? You are insane. Taiho looked at Yuna. Their eyes met across the room. In that moment, she understood something she had never understood before. This man was going to fight for her. This man was going to die for her. Not because she was valuable property. Not because he wanted something from her. But simply because she mattered to him. No one had ever fought for her before. The Krillax raised his weapon and pointed it at Taiho's chest. "Last chance, human. Walk away." Taiho did not walk away. He moved faster than anyone expected. The plasma cutter swung in a wide arc, its blade of superheated energy slicing through the air. It cut through the leader's weapon before he could fire. The Krillax screamed as the energy burned his hands. The other soldiers opened fire. Taiho felt 2 bolts hit his shoulder. They burned through his clothes and into his flesh. The pain was incredible, like fire and ice mixed together. But he did not stop. He could not stop. Humans were persistent predators. That was what made them special. They did not have claws or fangs. They were not the fastest or the strongest. But they never gave up. They would keep fighting long after any sensible creature would have quit. Taiho cut down the first soldier with a swing to his legs. The second soldier went down with a thrust to his chest. The third soldier tried to run, and Taiho caught him at the door. The leader stood alone now. His hands were burned. His weapon was destroyed. His soldiers lay still on the floor. "What are you?" He gasped, backing away in terror. Taiho stood in the middle of the room. Blood ran down his arm from the wounds in his shoulder. His face was pale from pain and blood loss. But his dark eyes were steady. "I am human," he said, "and she is under my protection." The Krillax leader ran. He fled through the door and into the storm, disappearing into the red dust. Taiho let him go. He did not have the strength to chase anyone. The plasma cutter fell from his fingers. His legs began to shake. The room spun around him. "Taiho!" Yuna's voice cut through the fog in his mind. He felt her hands on his face. Her silver skin was cool against his burning flesh. "You are hurt," she whispered. "You are badly hurt. Are you okay?" he asked. His voice sounded far away. "Did they hurt you?" "I am fine. Because of you." Tears were streaming down her silver cheeks, leaving trails like liquid metal. "Why did you do that? You could have died. You should have died." Taiho tried to smile. "I had to? Why?" But he did not answer. His eyes closed, and he collapsed in her arms. Yuna held him on the floor of the small building. His blood soaked into her clothes. Her tears fell on his face. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside, Yuna made a promise. This man had fought for her. This man had almost died for her. She would do whatever it took to save him. She had been powerless her whole life. She had been a victim her whole life. Not anymore. She would not let him die. Not now. Not ever. Taiho opened his eyes slowly. Everything was blurry. The ceiling above him was white and smooth, not the gray metal of his home. Strange machines beeped softly nearby. The air smelled clean, like a hospital. He tried to sit up, but pain exploded through his shoulder. He gasped and fell back against the soft pillow. "Do not move." Yuna's voice came from somewhere to his right. He turned his head and saw her sitting in a chair beside his bed. Her silver skin looked pale and tired. Dark circles had formed under her purple eyes. She looked like she had not slept in days. "Where am I?" Taiho asked. His throat was dry and his voice was rough. The medical center in the nearest settlement, Una said. The storm ended 3 days ago. I called for help as soon as the communication signal started working again. 3 days. He had been unconscious for 3 days. Taiho looked down at his shoulder. It was wrapped in thick white bandages. He could feel a strange tingling beneath the cloth, the tiny machines the doctors used to repair damaged tissue. The doctor said you lost too much blood, Una continued. Her voice shook slightly. They said the burns from the energy weapons went deep into your body. They said most people would have fallen after the first shot. She paused and took a shaky breath. They said you kept fighting after 2 shots. They could not understand how that was possible. Taiho remembered the fight in pieces. The Krillax soldiers. The plasma cutter in his hands. The burning pain in his shoulder. And Una standing in the corner, balanced on her damaged leg, refusing to kneel. You were standing, he said, during the attack. You were standing on your bad leg. Una nodded slowly. Yes, that must have hurt. Yes, why did you do it? Una was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than a whisper. Because I could not kneel to them. Not again. I have knelt before so many masters. I have lowered my eyes and bent my body and done whatever they wanted. But when those soldiers came for me, something inside me refused to break. She looked up and met his eyes. And then you came. You ran through the storm with nothing but a cutting tool. You fought like a demon. You took their shots and kept coming. I have never seen anything like it. Taiho reached out with his good arm and took her hand. Her silver skin was cool and smooth against his palm. I would do it again, he said simply. 100 times. 1,000 times. Why? The question hung in the air between them. Taiho knew he should keep his distance. He had promised her safety. He had promised that their relationship was only business. But he was tired of keeping promises that broke his heart. Because I love you, he said. I think I have loved you since the first day. When you stood in that auction line with nothing in your eyes, I wanted to give you back everything they took from you. I wanted to see you smile. I wanted to hear you laugh. I wanted to spend my life making you happy. Tears spilled down Yuna's silver cheeks. They fell like drops of liquid light. I have to tell you something, Taiho continued. I destroyed your ownership papers during the 2nd week. You have been free this whole time. I was just afraid to tell you. I thought if you knew you could leave, you would go somewhere better. Una stared at him. Her purple eyes were wide with shock. You set me free? Weeks ago? Yes, and you never told me? I was a coward. I was afraid of losing you. Una pulled her hand away from his. For one terrible moment, Taiho thought she was going to leave. He thought she would stand up and walk out and never come back. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. You foolish, wonderful human, she whispered. Where would I go? What can I possibly want that is not here? Then she opened herself to him completely. Valori had special abilities. They could share their emotions with others, letting them feel what they felt. Una had kept her abilities locked away for years, afraid of being hurt. But now she let them flow freely, sharing everything inside her heart. Taiho felt her feelings wash over him like warm water. He felt her fear slowly becoming safety. He felt her loneliness dissolving into friendship. He felt her pain transforming into peace. And beneath it all, he felt something bright and strong and unbreakable. Love. She loved him. This beautiful, broken woman loved him as much as he loved her. Everyone in the galaxy thinks humans are primitive, Una said softly. They look at your short lives and small bodies and think you are weak. They do not understand what you truly are. You are not primitive. You are wild. You are free. You love without counting the cost. You fight without calculating the odds. You gave a damaged slave a lock for her door and never asked for anything in return. She lifted her head and looked into his eyes. I have been property my whole life. I have been a decoration and a toy and a tool. But you saw me as a person. You saw me as someone worth fighting for. Someone worth almost dying for. She took a deep breath. I do not know what will happen next. I do not know if I can be what you need. But I know that I want to stay with you. Here on this farm, in this desert, for as long as you will have me. Taiho smiled. It was his usual crooked, honest smile. I wanted a farm servant, he admitted. And what do you want now? Just you, Yuna. Only you. She leaned down and kissed him gently, careful not to hurt his shoulder. Her lips were cool and sweet. It was the first kiss either of them had ever had that meant something real. It was not the last. 5 years passed on the farm. Under the twin suns, the farm grew larger. 20 domes now spread across the red desert. Humans and Valori worked side by side, growing food for settlements across the planet. What had started as one man's desperate struggle had become a symbol of what was possible. And in the original building, now much larger with new rooms added, Taiho watched his daughter take her first steps. She was beautiful, their little girl. Her skin was soft gray, a mix of her mother's silver and her father's brown. Her eyes were purple like her mother's, bright and curious. Her personality was pure human, stubborn, fearless, and absolutely certain that rules did not apply to her. She's climbing the seed cabinet again. Yuna called from the kitchen. Taiho grabbed his daughter before she could cause damage. She giggled and grabbed at his face with tiny fingers. She is her mother's daughter, Taiho said, kissing her forehead. Brilliant and completely unstoppable. Yuna appeared in the doorway. She still limped, though it was less noticeable after years of medical treatment. Her silver skin glowed with health. Her purple eyes sparkled with joy. No, she said with a smile. She is her father's daughter. Brave, kind, and absolutely convinced that anything can be climbed. Taiho laughed and walked over to kiss his wife. Their daughter clapped her hands with delight. Outside, the twin suns rose over the red desert, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and gold. In the domes, green plants grew strong and tall. In the settlement, families started their day. Far across the galaxy. In the great halls where powerful beings made decisions, humans were still listed as a primitive species. New to space. Barely worth noticing, but Yuna knew the truth. And slowly, one planet at a time, the galaxy was learning. Humans were not primitive. Humans were not weak. Humans were hoped out, and sometimes. All it took to prove it was one lonely farmer and 50 credits. This is the end of their story. But it is only the beginning of what humans and Valerie could build together. Under the twin suns, the future stretched out before them, bright and full of promise. And Taiho and Yuna faced it together, hand in hand, exactly as they were always meant to.